Hey Panda Nation, you are listening to the Inverted Gear podcast with your hosts Nelson and Hillary. Join us every week as we take you behind the scenes into our brand, discuss upcoming projects, and conversate beyond the mat with the interesting people we've met along the way.
Inverted Gear podcast episode number 6. I'm here, Nelson Puentes, joined by my co-host
Hillary Witt.
And our guest today. Before I butcher your name, what is the correct pronunciation?
Okay, the way I always say it is like it's a typical Irish name, so you have to pick half the letters, you throw them away, and you hope you pick the right half. So the easiest way is just to say ruin. Like think the English word R-U-I-N, ruin. That's pretty close.
Ruadhn, awesome. Ruadhn, how are you today?
Not bad. We were just beforehand talking about like Corona and how it's turned basically schedules and everything upside down. But look, in the overall scheme of things, I'm pretty lucky. I'm pretty fortunate. It hasn't hit me that hard. It's a little bit boring. It's a little bit frustrating when you can't do the normal shit. But look, I'm sitting here, comfortable surroundings, beautiful part of the world, so can't really complain.
For those that don't know you, you are located in a small town in Germany.
Yeah, so I'm in Heidelberg, which is in the southwest of Germany. Like by far one of the nicest parts of the country, like one of the nicest cities. Been here now for about a decade or so. Even in terms of like not just the city, but the little corner off it, the little street that I'm on, we're really lucky. Because, during lockdown and especially during the quarantine I had to do last year when I actually had Corona, we got a balcony, I can go out, I can stretch my legs, I can get some fresh air, and I'm just reading about all these poor people stuck in like tiny apartments in Dublin, with 6 other people. They haven't been able to leave their room for a year, so yeah, I'm all good. Like, I cannot complain.
Yeah, and then Heidelberg is also known in the Jiu-Jitsu community because about pre-Corona times, once a year, about 300 globetrotters would descend upon the town.
Yeah, there's been, at least 3 of those camps now, like 3, maybe 4. Huge, big facilities, about 10 minutes from where I live. That's where a lot of the Olympic teams, like the German teams in things like weightlifting and boxing and I think rugby and stuff. So, it's not ultra modern. It's built back in, the 70s or so, but it's big. You can fit a lot of mats in there. You can fit a lot of people in there. So it was every summer or fall for the past 3 years. You'd have 200, I think maybe even 300 some years, globetrotters from all over the world. Hopefully it happens again this summer. There's another one scheduled for the end of July, I believe. But it's all just such a coin toss at the moment. Everything looks like it's going according to plan, and then numbers will go above a certain kind of arbitrary limit, then the borders get closed. So we'll see. Fingers crossed, but that's all we can do.
Yeah, and then we actually met during a camp in Greenland.
Yeah, that was back
a few years back now.
2016, I think it was, because every so often like the Facebook memories will pop up. So that, if I'm remembering right, was May 2016. So yeah, I remember like you guys were already there. So this is like tiny little camp, like basically like a miniature training group that Christian from Globetrotters put together. There was like 10 of us, I think, all together, like mostly Icelanders and Christian. Then it was you guys, Scotty from Australia, and then I flew in. You had already been there for a few days, so I think you managed to just like pull that Guinness World Record away from Christian like 24 hours in advance, the first black belt to ever train in the country of Greenland or ever teach in the country of Greenland. And then I just staggered in a day or two afterwards.
Yeah, it was, Christian liked to call it the protocamp. Because at the beginning, he just wanted to bring some black belts to train at Jason's academy. Jason at the time was a blue belt that had trained with Christian when he was going to university in Denmark. So he was in Copenhagen and then went back home, started his little academy, invited Christian to come, and then Christian wanted to bring a bunch of black belts. So a lot of people fell out. There was few weeks before they couldn't find tickets or the tickets were too expensive, whatever. And that's why he opened it up. It's like, hey, we got accommodations for I think 10 people. So if you can make it to Greenland, we'll take care of you. So you're one of the brave souls that jumped into the fray.
Yeah, like two weeks or so.
Made your way over.
Yeah, because that do not underestimate the cost of getting to Greenland. Like I think that's what happened is people were like, Greenland, yeah, that's in Europe somewhere, no problem. Yeah, count me in. And then you look up the cost of getting there, and you're like, Jesus fucking Christ! Like what? I think I need both my kidneys. Like I don't think I can afford this. And I was there like on the fence, like, man, will I? But the opportunity to go to Greenland, which is such a unique place, and to go and train as well to kind of help build up the sport in the country. I think they have a few other clubs now, but at the time that was the only BJJ club in the country. And it was, I think because we were there with the locals, I was staying, I think it was like with 2 or 3 of the Icelandic guys in Jason's mother's house, somewhere out on the outskirts of Nuuk, and they treated us so well. And there was that last night where they cooked all the local Greenlandic delicacies like the musk ox jerky and the whale blubber and the dried out fish that you probably just wouldn't have got if you were there as a tourist. So that was an amazing experience. And then on the last day, just because we're all a bunch of idiots, we ran into the sea. You remember that one? I think you were there for that.
I remember that. Yeah. We jumped into the water, and it was funny because it was the last day. So a lot of the guys went out the night before, and like they stay up way too late, so they slept through the time we had like coordinated to jump into the water at 10 a.m. or whatever. So half of us were there at 10 a.m. and then it started getting really windy and cold, and everybody's like, Christian's not here. Maybe we shouldn't do this. And I think me and you were like, all right, guys, like, look,
it's now or never already. Yeah,
it's freaking cold. The water's right there.
Yeah, it was now or never. There was like wave 1 and wave 2, and we're just like, okay, we're doing this now, or it's never gonna happen. Because I looked at the sea temperature beforehand. I think it was like 0 degrees Celsius, so just like borderline before the ice would kind of set in. And we're like, let's go in and have a swim. And I was like, nope, get in, get your head down, get the fuck back out, and try and not die.
Oh, fascinating.
Yeah, hard pass. I was like, I'll be camera girl since Christian's not here.
Yeah, Hillary's like, I'll take pictures.
I'll stay bundled up. It was just, when it's too windy like that, like, I can handle the cold, but when it's windy and it just bites at you, it's
I seem to remember, like, I remember, Hillary, you took the picture.
I enjoyed watching all of you.
Yeah, and I think, wasn't there like some kind of like elderly Greenlandic woman who was there on the beach with you as a spectator? And I think she was slightly disappointed that we didn't do it naked. Like, she was just there like waiting, and then we're all like, man.
She's waiting you to strip down 100%.
Yeah, she was like, fuck, this is boring, I'm going home now.
Oh my god, yeah, no, that was a cool experience. Like you mentioned, that not only the food, but getting to experience a lot of their culture, and just being around the locals for a long time. One of my favorite memories was we were the Nuuk like sports complex, and it was just funny because every time there was a team, there was like different sports going on: volleyball, soccer, basketball.
Remember it was badminton, maybe?
Badminton.
You were aggressive.
Yeah, because every time anything they did, it was like the schedule would say national team practice.
Yeah.
Whatever it was the national team doing something.
It was, and it was all ages.
Yes.
Everyone was on the national team.
Yeah. I think that sports complex was like the tallest building in the country. You kind of like see it just like coming into town on the taxi. It's like, yeah, okay, I think that's me, the big blue building over there. So no, I loved it. I was in the country for I think 4 days max. Amazing place, but man, I would love to go back, but you got a budget for it.
Yeah, I think this is a good segue into one of the things we want to talk about was like language learning, because when we're in Greenland, the official language is Greenlandic, which to me is one of the most alien-sounding languages I ever heard. It has Inuit roots, and then whatever came over with what was the guy's name? Oh, I forgot already. He had his statue in town, but it does like to the point where like they do speak Danish. So some of the Icelandic guys could pick out maybe 1 out of every 10 words that came over from the more Scandinavian language, the more Scandinavian roots. But it was just fascinating being around and like a lot of, like, especially like the locals, maybe like the more better, like the ones that went to university and stuff will know English, but most of the people there did not speak English at all. It was either you spoke Greenlandic or you had somebody that spoke Danish with you. Otherwise, communicating was really hard.
Yeah, I mean, I was really fascinated by that because, before I went, I knew, okay, Greenland was a former Danish colony, so they had that Danish connection. I actually thought like Danish was just going to be the language on the street, like you have in many parts of the world. The local kind of the native language has kind of just been pushed to the periphery, and it's just old people that speak it. So I thought it was going to be Danish everywhere. And then you land and you're like, oh no, okay, this is like a full-on Greenlandic speaking country. The Greenlandic newspapers and magazines. And I was on the little plane from Kangerlussuaq down to Nuuk, and the safety announcement was in Greenlandic, and that was it. I was like, fuck you, if you don't speak Danish, or if you don't speak the local language, that's like, just figure out how to put your seatbelt on. So I was amazed at how widespread it was. And it's like I think there's still a big connection between Greenland and Denmark. So a lot of people go to Copenhagen to university. They learn Danish in school. So Danish is definitely the big second language. I know some of the Icelanders who came with us, because they also study Danish in school. Like they could sometimes communicate with the taxi drivers and stuff just by trying to remember the little bit of Danish they'd learned 15 years previously. But Greenlandic as a language is like, good luck. There's no little footholds there at all. If you speak a European language, maybe they've got like a loan word here or there from Danish, but it's completely different. So you would need to speak one of the Inuit languages of far northern Canada to get any kind of insight there. And it's great to hear it because, as you said, like coming from the perspective of an English speaker or a Spanish speaker or a Danish speaker, it is absolutely alien. It's got these giant words, he's got these really unfamiliar sounds, and it was amazing just to hear it on the street and to see it everywhere, like actually alive and not just pushed into little fishing villages and old folks' homes. So that was just a really culturally interesting part of the whole trip.
Yeah, like the thing about it is, anytime you, especially from my perspective, like, growing up speaking Spanish and then like learning English. So anytime you hear like let's call it Native American, like that, because it has such an Inuit root. I remember going to Paraguay and hearing people speak Guarani, and same thing, it just sounds like so foreign. Like, it's not only the way the sounds, but like the way, like how long some of the words are, because they only have like so many syllables that they use, so the words just get longer and longer because it's only so many syllables available. Same thing, I remember one time we were in Jersey City.
They were speaking Mayan.
Yeah, they were speaking like a Mayan dialect. These like Guatemalan ladies, and we were like, "What is happening?" I was like, "Hey, like, can I ask you, like, what are you speaking?" It's like, "Oh, it's a dialect from like our people," and then they told me they were from like this tribe in Guatemala before they moved to Jersey City, and it was just fascinating. Every time you encounter a language, and like you said, like there's no European foothold to catch it, because as you encounter languages, if like all the Romance languages, if I hear a French word, an Italian word, a Portuguese word, I can catch the meaning of it just because of the root of the word, or like whatever. Same like when it comes to like whatever the Germanic family tree or the more Scandinavian language is the same thing. But when you come across these things, it's like, oh my god, like I have nothing.
Yeah. That was kind of a little saving grace for me in Greenland, is because I've been there in Germany now for 10 years. And Danish is also a Germanic language, so I cannot speak it at all, and I can't understand it because Danish pronunciation is batshit insane. But when I see it written down, you can start seeing some of the links. Or like, I was in Copenhagen for the Globetrotters camp once, and like by the end of the week, I'd be in supermarkets and I'd hear announcements. I was like, okay, that sounds like, if you punched a German in the head over and over and then like shoved a potato in their mouth, just to garble their pronunciation beyond all recognition. Like, I think that's what they're saying. But then when I see it written down, it's like, yeah, okay, then it becomes a little bit clearer. So when I'm in Greenland, and they will often have, like a bilingual Greenlandic Danish menu or something in a little cafe. And that was my one saving grace, because like Greenlandic is just beyond me entirely.
So, Ruadhn, how many languages do you speak?
I mean, look, the way I always put it is that I speak like 1.8. Like if you add up all the so English, and then if you add up all the like horrible, just like bad grammar and random vocabulary of all the weird stuff that I've come across, it's probably going to make up 1.8 altogether. So I've been here for 10 years. I can speak German decently well. I can have a conversation about pretty much anything. My grammar is shite. So I often say like my German is like, if you ever see like a chimpanzee trying to open a coconut with a rock, it's like this big mess and like pieces of coconut go everywhere. You'll get it open. It's not going to be pretty. He's going to make a horrendous catastrophe, but I'll get there. So that's my German. I don't really give a shit about getting the grammar correct. I just kind of pick random participles and make the gender up for words as it goes. So I can get by. From German, I can like read things. If I go to Norway, I can make the gist of a newspaper. Denmark, Sweden, whatever. I studied French in school. I studied Irish in school. I studied a little bit of Russian just for the sake of it, because, some of the places I go to, Russian is really useful. So like Central Asia or Eastern Europe, especially among older people in Eastern Europe, Russian is still quite useful, at least to be able to read it. I studied a little bit of Japanese on the sides. So I have like bits and pieces here and there. I can order a coffee in probably, a dozen, 2 dozen different places, but I would never say I speak it, because I don't. I know words, like I know a bunch of random words, and I can maybe shove them together into some semblance of a sentence. But yeah, I always say like 1.8, English, and then like 0.6 German and 0.2 Russian on that day, and then I forget it, and then it goes down to 1.7 again. So it's fluid.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, like, it all depends how you define fluency, and then what are you trying to get out of learning the language. So sometimes people study languages and then they get obsessed with conjugating in imperfect past form of like certain verbs. And like when I travel, I care about is like, can I be human? Can I say good morning? Can I say thank you? Can I ask for a coffee? Can I ask for directions, or where's the bathroom? Stuff like that. Where can I wash my hands? Like that kind of things is what matters to me. So a lot of times people look at language learning and then they're like, I can't do this. It's too complicated, because they are doing like, the more formal training. They're reading a book, or like even like some of these apps now. They're great at building the vocabulary, but sometimes they just take you down this path where you're learning some things that have like, there's no use for them for you. Will you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, I've noticed that in apps like Duolingo. You have Los Gatos Beben Leche and all this kind of random stuff in Spanish Duolingo, and then in Russian it's the same. The horse rents a book from the library or whatever, and you're never ever going to be able to use those phrases in real life. Although I do have to say, like, I use Duolingo a lot for Russian. And I do have to say, like, I actually like those random phrases, precisely because they're so unusual, they stick in my mind more. So, if I get a phrase in Duolingo, something like, the horse wears a big red hat. I was like, that's the most bullshit crazy sentence I've ever come across. And it sticks in my head. And then, because I remember it, I realize, okay, well, I'm never going to need to use this phrase, the horse wears a big red hat. But if I swap out the word horse for the word, woman, which I remember from a previous crazy phrase, then I can maybe make something a little bit more realistic. So I actually do like the random stuff, because it does, at least for me, stick a little bit more. But one thing I was actually talking to a friend about recently, in terms of like language learning and language teaching, and how badly it can be done in some places, is actually when it comes to Irish in Ireland. So, we all speak English now, except for a few fairly select people out on the western coast. So we learn the Irish language in school. It's mandatory. But it's taught so badly that you have a nation full of people who have studied that language from the age of 5 years old, 6 years old, up until you leave school at 17 or 18, and no one can have a conversation in it. Like, no one can, or let's say very, very few people can have a functional conversation in it. And it's because they teach it in such a just crazy illogical way. in that it's almost like they assume you already know how to speak it. Like, if you go to school in the US, or if you go to school in Chile, let's say, and you go to like Spanish class in Chile or English class in the US, they don't have to teach you how to speak Spanish, because you're in Chile, you speak Spanish everywhere, you speak it at home, you speak it with your friends, you speak it like out in the real world. So they don't have to teach you how to have a Spanish conversation. They will have to teach you how to spell the words, how to write properly, things like grammar. They might do a little bit of literature and poetry, like, hey, here's this famous author. They do that for Irish. So it's like they assume you already know how to speak it. So, okay, we're not going to have any conversational practice. Let's look at this like miserable, boring poem from the 19th century about some old woman on this island who's starving because, all her potatoes died. That's your Irish class. And then you're there as a 10-year-old thinking like, what the fuck? When am I ever going to need this? I can't, if I went to a hypothetical Irish-speaking restaurant, I would not be able to ask for a coffee. I wouldn't be able to order a single piece of food, but I can recite, verbatim, this passage from this mid-19th century poem. And I will be able to pass my exams by reciting that. But I have no idea how to have an actual conversation. And then you end up with a bunch of people who are 17, 18 years old. They graduate high school. They could get an A+ in their Irish exam. But if you turn to them in Irish and you say, tell me about your day, they hit a wall straight away. So I think that's a classic example of how badly languages can be taught. Just when it's so misaimed, and it's really damaging. I think it's even worse than not teaching it at all, because it kills people's love for it almost in the cradle, and they rebel against it because it just becomes this obligation that they have to suffer through. And then they can't even use it at the end of it. So
I feel a lot of people experience that, and you have all these people like, I just can't speak another language. Especially in the US, if you go into the system, you get to pick. What was your experience when you were growing up here?
So yeah, thanks for letting me chime in. But yeah, no, what you're saying about your Irish class, I felt a lot of that in English, especially the early elementary and middle school classes, where it was a lot about how the construction was if you're going to write and read versus how you actually speak. It sounds totally different in conversation, and it's English, and it's the one language I had to worry about pretty much all my life until high school, when we could choose. I mean, my high school was also very small, but it was like Spanish or German. I think some of the larger schools you could learn Latin, but it was more about the reading rather than the communication, like the conversation. It was more about just translation, how you can translate that into Italian then, or French, or I think that was about it then.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing here in the area is interesting about language is there was a lot of German immigrants here.
So while I was growing up, it really wasn't in school, but I remember my grandmother having old newspapers. We had a language, Pennsylvania Dutch, very specific to the area, from German immigrants, and it just translated over for everyone else who was an immigrant, like the Irish and the Polish. It just, instead of Deutsch, it was Dutch. So it became Pennsylvania Dutch, and then they just developed their own dialect and words. And interesting how it still comes up. Some of the older generations, we still have it.
There is somewhat of a movement to bring it back because it is becoming a lost
Amish,
language.
Actually,
and the Amish
keeping it alive.
The Amish people are keeping it alive, and now a lot of people in the area with German roots are trying to bring it back because it is such a unique thing to the area.
It's especially in signage and tradition, like a lot of traditional like cooking and stories and history and of the area. People are getting more and more interested in it again, which is pretty special.
Yeah, I think that the Pennsylvania Dutch, or like the dialect that the Amish speak, I believe that's a form of Plattdeutsch, which is from the northern part of Germany, and you still have a lot of people up there that speak it, like I suppose more so older people. But then when I look at it, because German's a weird language in general. Like, when you think of German, like the thing you learn in an American high school, or the thing that I learn even over here, and that most people do speak with each other, what you would consider German, is called Hochdeutsch, like High German. And that's quite it's a fairly recent innovation. It's a 20th century like high dialect, a uniform dialect for the entire country. But you go back 100 years ago, no one was speaking that type of German. It was all the little regional variants like Bavarian or Pfälzisch or Plattdeutsch or, all these countless dozens of little dialects, because Germany wasn't a unified country up until the end of the 19th century. It was all these little principalities and, this king owned this field and people in that field spoke a particular way. So Hochdeutsch, like this thing that I learn and that I speak and that you learn in high school, that's quite new and it is quite unnatural. So it's a shame, like these kind of the smaller languages or the minority variants of German are probably going to die out bit by bit, because young people nowadays, you go to school, you learn your Hochdeutsch, your High German. Media is all in Hochdeutsch. With each other, they would probably speak Hochdeutsch as well. And the dialects then just become this thing that their grandparents speak, or, maybe they would use once a year when they go back to their hometowns. And there's no internet in that language. There's no songs in that language, apart from, ultra old folk songs. So give it another 50, 100 years, it probably will all just be this flat Hochdeutsch. And, the older people up in northern Germany probably won't even speak Plattdeutsch anymore. So the Amish or the people there might be the lone reservoir of that when it dies out in its homeland. Who knows?
Yeah. I mean, one of the things I found interesting about language learning is you can connect it to the way I think about learning grappling, because it is not only a skill, but it does become, you can compare it to like language learning in a lot of ways. So one of the problems I have with the way a lot of grappling is taught, like you were saying before, sometimes when you teach a language, you have the assumption they already know how to speak it, so you're teaching them how to speak it correctly. So a lot of times when we're teaching grappling, especially more advanced moves, is we are making the assumption that the people we're teaching this to have the mobility to get into that shape, have the body awareness and body control to do some of these things. And that's why you always see, more advanced grapplers, you can teach them a new move and they can pick it up right away, because they're so familiar with their body and, making the shapes necessary to get there. Versus when we teach white belts, especially guys that can barely, the awareness of the way their hips work is not there yet.
Yep.
It is so much harder to teach a basic armbar, because they use having the understanding of okay, I need to move my hip here, I need to put my foot here, and I need to turn my body. They know that's what they need to do, but they can't get their body to do it yet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it is a physical language in that regard, and it has its own, grammar and phrases. And when you've got a baseline, then you can jump off and you can learn new things a lot quicker. I think it's the same, if someone has learned a language before, you can probably teach them a second one a lot quicker. Even if that language is fairly unrelated, they've gone through the process before, so those neural pathways have already been a little bit kind of opened up. I notice it with my girlfriend, for instance. She speaks 5 languages. And she can pick up new ones quite quickly, because for her, she's like, okay, I've done this and I can do it again. It's not this insurmountable mountain. Whereas for someone like me, when I moved over to Germany 10 years ago, like I said, I had studied French and I had studied Irish, but I never ever had to learn a language to be functionally conversational in it. I just had to learn enough to pass an exam. So memorize this rule, memorize this poem, be able to answer questions on this play or whatever. But I never would have had to have a conversation. And when I moved over here, I was like, oh, fuck, I need to live. I need to be able to get food, and I need to be able to, book a doctor's appointment or whatever. So for me, that was much more of an intimidating peak. Whereas for her or for anyone else who has learned it before, you learned English. So those neural pathways are there. And I think if you jumped off and you said, you know what, I'm going to take a year and I'm going to learn Russian, I think you would get there quicker than I would, for sure.
The other thing I wanted to talk...
that with Italian and Japanese.
Yeah, I mean, when we were traveling a lot, especially before we had a kid and we had more time, I was really into language learning. And then it was predicated on whatever the upcoming trip was. So at one point, Christian did a camp in Italy. It was in Sardinia, and I studied Italian for like 3 months, and I was like on it every day. I was watching TV in Italian. I was going to Duolingo, building my vocabulary, and like, it's similar enough to Spanish where I could, like, grammatically and like the way you conjugate things. So like I picked it up fairly quickly. The one tricky thing between Italian and Spanish is like both of them gender things, but a lot of them are opposite. Where like the la mesa, la mesa is in Spanish is like female object, while it in Italian was like male. Like that kind of like silly things where it just comes with practice. But we ended up going to Sardinia, and then a lot of people in Sardinia actually, like, their main language was Sardo, especially the older people, where you speak Sardo to each other. And that is just such a mishmash of like Italian and some Portuguese words and like a little bit of Spanish and then like whatever came over from Africa. So it was just another fascinating like language experience. What I wanted to ask you about is we were talking about dialects before, and also like how languages can disappear. You have been doing this fascinating thing. You're trying to bring back an extinct grappling style, and you've been doing it so by loaning techniques, similar techniques from like other grappling styles, in order to rebuild what is it called, a collar and elbow?
Yeah, that's the one. So yeah, that's something I have been working on for the past few years. So basically, in a nutshell, it was a form of jacket wrestling from Ireland. Like, it was hugely popular in the 19th century, and then because Irish people went everywhere, it was also very popular in places like the US and in Australia and New Zealand as well. And then around about the end of the 19th century, and definitely as you start moving into the early decades of the 20th century, it took a serious hit in terms of popularity, and it just disappeared, not overnight, but very quickly and very completely, to the extent that if you ask anyone in Ireland now about collar and elbow, you're just going to get question marks. Like, even older people, I asked my father, and he's been involved in sport for most of his life, and he grew up in a very traditional, Irish speaking part of the country. Never heard of it. So it really, really disappeared completely. There's a lot of reasons why it disappeared. I won't go into them in a huge amount of details, but one significant factor was the growing popularity of other grappling styles like catch wrestling and Greco-Roman. Like, they really started to kind of hit their peak in at least the Anglosphere in the late 19th century, and people just thought they were, more exciting, especially catch wrestling with submissions and stuff, similar to nowadays. Like, MMA has kind of taken a bit of popularity away from things like boxing. So collar and elbow took a hit, took basically a fatal hit, and disappeared and was gone for the rest of the 20th century until I started trying to light a little bit of a fire under it. So one of the big challenges I ran into was the fact that there's no living practitioners at all. There's no technique manuals. So basically we have no one we can talk to and find out how is this done. And we have nothing that we can really look at for visual guidance. And, I do often compare grappling to language because of just how ubiquitous it is. I always say that if you have a group of people anywhere throughout history, any part of the world, at some point they're going to figure out how to communicate with each other. And at some point they will have gotten together and tried to throw each other to the ground. Now, if you had a dead language, like a dead language, it disappeared 100 years ago. There are no living speakers left. There are no dictionaries. There's no books. There's no manuals. If you were to try and figure out, okay, how do those people speak to each other? And there's no record of it at all. You're going to have a hard time because you literally have no reference points whatsoever. But with wrestling, it is at least a little bit easier because there are a much more limited number of ways that we as human beings can grab each other and put each other on the ground. So, an Icelandic person speaks entirely different from a Greenlandic person, from a Mongol, from a Japanese person. But no matter where you were born and when you were born, you on average have 2 arms and 2 legs, you stand upright on 2 feet, and you are subject to the same laws of physics as we are here in the modern day in our respective locations. So when we lay hands on each other and we try and take each other down, we are subject to the same rules and the same possibilities as our ancestors. So if I put someone in a grappling jacket and I say, okay, this is how it works. So I know these were the rules. Put the right hand on the collar, you put your right hand on my collar, left hand on the sleeve, and vice versa. So this was the fixed hold position. And we know they worked primarily with their legs. So it was a highly leg-centric style. You could push and pull with your upper body, no problem. But from reading those old newspaper accounts, we know it was very much like trips and foot blocks and toe taps and hooks, like all with the legs. There's only a certain number of ways you can do that. You know, a 19th century Irishman did not grow like a third leg that he could pull off all these crazy techniques with. You have two legs, same laws of physics. Let's try it out. Let's see what bubbles to the surface. You know, some of those newspaper accounts, thankfully, they are a little bit more detailed. So he said, you know, okay, this guy, he put his right foot on the other guy's left foot and he pulled him off balance. So you actually do get a little bit of a play-by-play account of the technique. But otherwise, it's a lot of hands-on experimentation. And as I've been doing this, I've been in touch with a lot of people in the HEMA community. Have you ever heard of HEMA? So the historical European martial arts. They're mainly focused on weapons like swords and so on. But a lot of them look at old, you know, medieval German wrestling manuals and so on. And one of the phrases that I came across there was the concept of frog DNA. So remember like Jurassic Park, the movie, they were talking about like rebuilding, you know, the dinosaur genetic code. And they said, yeah, there was all these gaps in the code. So we had to fill it with frog DNA to make it work. And when it comes to rebuilding some of these old wrestling styles, you know, you can't talk to anyone and say, hey, listen, show me how you used to do it, because they've been dead for 100 years. There's no books that you can consult. But you can try and fit in frog DNA from neighboring styles. So there are folk wrestling styles in Scotland that are still practiced to this day. And they use the same name for certain techniques as we used to use in Ireland 100 years ago. So I can look at a guy doing backhold wrestling at the Highland Games in Scotland and I can see, okay, so that's a back heel. You know, that's what I thought. That does correspond to this newspaper account. Then there's a pretty solid chance that this is how they used to do it in Ireland as well. So you can pull things in from neighbouring styles like, you know, Scottish backhold or Guren, which is practiced in Brittany in the northwest of France, or Cornish wrestling, which is practiced in the southwest of England. So it is, yeah, like a little science project where you're looking at things like textual sources from the 19th century, putting grappling jackets on each other and just figuring out what works, but also looking for those little pieces of frog DNA. So it is kind of like reconstructing a language, but thankfully a little bit easier because the laws of physics and the human body don't change.
Yeah, I remember somebody posting a picture of I guess like ruins in Thailand, and then you see like it's like, I don't know, thousands of years old, and then you see somebody has a kimura in one of the depictions.
Yeah.
And like, you know, it comes out like you can only bend the human body so many ways. So if people were fighting each other, grappling each other, eventually they would have figured out a lot of the things we have figured out over the last I don't know how many years Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu has been around. Where even now, like some of like the more modern techniques, people are going back and looking like some Kosen Judo from like the early 1900s and like, oh, they were doing their thing already.
Yeah, yeah.
So like it's not really new; it's just rediscovered and refined, maybe. But like, you know, we can only get into so many shapes that are conductive to grappling.
Yeah, exactly. And I think for stand-up grappling, it's even more obvious because something like BJJ or modern submission wrestling, that kind of prolonged focus on ground grappling and especially submission focused grappling, that is relatively new. You don't see many traditional wrestling styles that have a lot of ground wrestling, and you definitely don't see many where the focus is on getting the tap. It's usually on getting a pin. So the whole, Kosen Judo thing, I would be willing to say that those were the first people that really sat down and spent a prolonged amount of time on the ground, like sometimes almost to the exclusion of stand-up technique. Just like, okay, let's sit down and let's figure this out. And they were the progenitors of a lot of stuff. So you do see a lot of black and white Kosen judo photos of, De La Hiva guard and Ashigurami and so on. But like stand-up grappling, that's got an even longer pedigree. So we have been doing that for millennia. We have probably been doing that since before we were people, like since we were still, like kind of knocking bones together to make a campfire. And when you start looking at the basic mechanics of stand-up wrestling, so, I'm a human being, you're a human being, I'm going to try and take you and I'm going to try and put you on the ground. When you start looking at the common mechanics of how we can do that, they pop up over and over and over and over and over and over, like all throughout history. And I actually recently, just a few days ago, gave a presentation at, believe it or not, an archaeology conference for the University of Warsaw about what I've been doing with reconstructing collar and elbow techniques. And just as an example of how these mechanics pop up again and again and again, I looked at what I would call the foot block mechanic. So in judo, you'd call it sasai tsurukomiashi. You pull the guy forward, boom, you block with your foot. Or in sambo, it's something like pieradnaya podsechka. In Switzerland, they call it a Fußstich, which is like a foot stab. And I just showed examples of this exact mechanic in something like 9 different grappling styles. And I said, listen, I could show 39 examples, 49 examples, 59 examples from old Greek vases and the walls on Egyptian tombs. We have used this mechanic for 4,000 years. And I can prove that. I can show you someone using that mechanic 4,000 years ago. Grab the guy, pull the upper body forward, block with your foot. And if you were to try and come up with a dictionary of mechanics, you could do that quite easily. So you have your outside trip, you have your inside trip, you have an inner thigh reap like uchimata. And I can show you a 14th century German wrestling manual where a guy is doing an uchimata. It's not new. We have figured this out for quite some time. And those same mechanics, they always bubble to the surface via convergent evolution. Same things over and over and over and over. So these 19th century Irish wrestlers, they weren't doing anything, magic. They weren't throwing each other around with the force. They weren't like throwing fireballs at each other. They were 2 human beings with 2 arms and 2 legs. They were wearing jackets. They had a fixed hold on the front of the jacket, and their goal was to work with their legs to take each other down. And there's only a certain number of ways you can do that. So figuring out those ways and like nailing down a little curriculum and a syllabus is what I'm trying to do. And I would love if I could get a little bit of fire underneath it and try and spark some community level interest and grassroots level interest, because there are plenty of places around the world where they still do their old folk styles, like Mongolia or Georgia or Brittany in France or Scotland at the Highland Games. They'll go and do judo, they'll go and do sambo, they'll go and do BJJ, but they'll still come back and they'll do their own native folk style. And I think that's really cool, because it's a little bit of your heritage that you hold on to. Just like if you go, let's say you're like one of those women from the Mayan village somewhere in Central America. Yeah, they learn Spanish. Yeah, they learn English. But they keep their own language as well. They don't just kind of throw that over their shoulder and say, oh, well, now, fuck it. I only speak Spanish now. No, hold on to like the little part of you and your background that makes you you. And I think that's really cool. If people could, do their judo, do their sambo, do their BJJ, but also a little bit of collar and elbow on the community level. So we'll see how it works out.
That is amazing. And I think it's true. Especially like, every culture, I think most cultures did have some kind of martial art, if not a martial art and a grappling style of their own. I remember you put a map together with a lot of these. And like you were saying, like you see this a lot. For example, like India, they still have like that very strong, their wrestling tradition. But at the same time, a lot of these kids grow up doing that traditional Indian style, and eventually when they're like, they're certain age, they go in the Olympic Training Center and then they start doing freestyle and Greco. But their whole background is like, some of them don't touch a mat until they get to that level. Before that, they were just wrestling on the sand pits. Like, what is that movie we watched?
I know. I was trying to remember the movie. It was
I think
so
it's like
good.
Dongwa.
Oh,
or something like that.
Dangal,
Like
I think. Is
female Dangal, yeah. That is a
Dangal.
great movie.
Yeah.
And then apparently that movie like sparked a revolution in India. And now female wrestling is one of the most popular sports in the country because of that movie.
Yeah. There's like
And just it was a crossover with the traditional with their dad, and then how it changed when they went to the Olympic Center was amazing. Just how they were able to still keep it alive.
Yeah, like two countries that I really love to hold up as examples of how you can balance, the big international styles and the local folk styles are Georgia and Mongolia. Because Georgia has Chidalba, which is its local style. It's a type of jacket wrestling, which is it also takes place in like a sand pit or a dirt pit. And in Mongolia, they have Bokh. And similar situation, you have young Georgian kids and young Mongolian kids. They're wrestling from the time they can walk. I mean, you see like the little Mongolian kids and like their little tiny traditional wrestling outfits. They can barely walk in a straight line, but they're pulling off like, headlock throws and foot sweeps. And that's just what you do, as you grow up in Ireland, or I suppose maybe in Chile as well, and you get together with your friends and you just play football, they kick a football around. Like Mongolia, they get up, they hang out with their friends and they wrestle. That's it. Like that's your recreational activity. And they do their traditional style. And of course, then, if you have been doing a form of takedown-focused jacket wrestling since the age of 3, you're probably going to take to judo really well. So Georgia and Mongolia, despite being like really tiny countries from a population point of view, like I think Mongolia only has something like 3 million people, and they're always there, top of the medal tables in like any grappling sport you can think of. You're going to see a Mongolian name in there, like judo or Shuaijiao, which is Chinese wrestling, sumo, like the number one, like the unquestionable best sumo wrestler of all time, Hakuho, Mongolian, or Kazakh Kuresh. And I was actually talking to an American guy recently called Lavelle Marshall, and he studied Shuaijiao, which is Chinese wrestling, and he's been over living in Inner Mongolia for the past 2 years, like living and training with the locals. And he says, like, man, the Mongols are crazy. Like, they just love to wrestle. Like, any opportunity, they're going to wrestle. Like, they will go to competitions like the Nomad Games, which are held usually in Kyrgyzstan every second year. And they'll sign up for everything, even if they don't know the rules. Like, they'll sign up for Sambo, they'll sign up for Sumo, they'll sign up for Alush, which is a type of belt wrestling. They'll sign up for Kurash. Like, they'll never even look at the rule book beforehand. They just be like, I just want to wrestle. And he says, the way to figure out, like, okay, you're at one of these tournaments, like, the way to figure out who the Mongol is like, it's the guy that no one can take down. Like, no one can take them down because they've been wrestling since the age of 2. They're rooted like trees into the ground, and they have a game that just fits to everything. So Lavelle said there was like one Mongol guy, he got the gold medal in Sambo, despite having no idea about ground wrestling at all. He would just take people down and just kind of hold them there until the referee stood him back up. I was like, nope, that's it. So, tiny country, 3 million people, but they are the killers on the global grappling scene because they just wrestle in their traditional style. They build their solid grappling foundation. They go off into judo, to sumo, to sambo, whatever, but then they come back and they'll still do their local folk style. Just like the Georgians will go off and kill everyone in Olympic judo or Olympic freestyle. And it's still almost considered more prestigious to come back home and become, the king of Chidaoba. You've got your Olympic gold medal, but it's like, yeah, fuck that. I want to win a sheep in this local grappling tournament because that's it. You grew up hearing about those guys, like the guy, like the best wrestler in the country. Like, yeah, the Olympics are cool, but I want to be the king and I want to get that sheep. And I would love, I don't think it's going to happen, but I would love that kind of community level engagement to spring up in Ireland again around collar and elbow. Or at least, something where people will they'll go, they'll do their BJJ, whatever, but they'll still come back and they'll, put on a jacket, grab their friends and throw each other around every so often.
Yeah, we are very lucky that where we live in Pennsylvania is wrestling is like in everybody's DNA. it probably like if you look at college national champions the last 10 years, something ridiculous like 70% of them have come out of Pennsylvania. Penn State, they were like NCAA nationals where I think last weekend Iowa won the team title. Penn State has won something like 8 out of the last 10, and so it's Pennsylvania wrestling is the popularity of wrestling in Pennsylvania is like an all-time high where it is kind of waning outside and like other parts of the U.S. is only getting popularity in Pennsylvania. So with one little boy walking around and another one on the way, we are looking forward to driving these guys around to like little wrestling tournaments and have them experience like the folk style. Folk style wrestling, which is their own style, is like different than Greco and different rule set than Greco or freestyle.
Well, it's funny how natural it is, like especially at that age when they're still learning how to talk, but you can communicate, like you said, by just try to go to the ground or jump up high and climb things. And it's something about the wrestling and other martial arts, like where you're using what you already have versus football, or you need all kinds of padding, helmet, even other sports with balls. You need a ball, but you don't always have a ball. Or you're in a room that doesn't really have the space for a ball, but you can always be practicing your balance and how to connect with somebody, especially physically, when you can't always verbalize. So I'm just saying, like at that age especially, how natural it is, like when you watch little kids.
I think grappling with each other is a basic human instinct. It's like kind of like as you're learning your moving patterns, you learn like how to hinge at your hips, how to squat, how to get your arms above your head, all these kind of things. But then like forward rolls, backward rolls, that kind of thing. But grappling with like somebody similar size to you, it's just like inner DNA, and like I really believe that, and it's what I think jiu-jitsu is so good for grown-ups. Like if you're an adult and you really haven't moved in a long time, bring in this like movement practice and like grappling against a resistant opponent again. It really brings people like so many like health benefits versus like just being sedentary. So at the same time, like we were saying before, is like I really look forward to our kids being involved in wrestling, and then like they have their whole life to do jiu-jitsu later on. But I really want to encourage our little ones to wrestle and like really do stand up when they're young. And like I think kids that grow up wrestling, they're some of the strongest human beings in the planet. Even if they're not lifting weights, just wrestling against a resistant opponent over and over again and having your body go through that, it is ridiculous.
Yeah, it's two things I'm often jealous of kids, like two things I wish I had been able to do when I was growing up, is like do something like wrestling and learn a language. Because like kids just pick languages up. You flick a light switch and then all of a sudden they're putting Spanish sentences together. It's like, God damn it, that took me like 6 fucking months. So yeah, I wish I wish I had the opportunity to do that. So yeah, get them in wrestling and
amazing.
Like talk Spanish to them constantly.
Just the way their brain soaks it in and they use it immediately.
That brain elasticity is still there. So
no, because I know trying to learn Spanish for me later in life, being exposed to it, it was all about translation and reading versus now it's like you're still learning letters, but you can communicate, like you can hear it and you're already immersed in it. So just as much as possible. Yep.
Yeah, and our little one speaks more Spanish than he speaks English right now. It's like he wants food, he wants water, he asks for agua, he wants a protein, he asks for carne, he'll ask for like manzana, like it's just like whatever words he uses. Usually there's a lot, most of them are Spanish words, and his English is coming along. But man, so good talking to you, man.
Yeah.
It was great.
No, it's great to catch up. Yeah, it's especially thinking back on Greenland, man. It's like I'm feeling a bit of a hankering for some musk oxen jerky or something that costs like €20.
Yeah, like an apple.
Yeah, an apple, basically an apple. Man, I miss paying €20 for a single apple.
How good was that apple, right?
I made it last. Great, like I hid it under my bed.
Where can people find you online?
Okay, so if you're interested in the collar and elbow stuff, I have a website where I gather all the important info, so that's collarandelbow.ie. The wider kind of general folk wrestling, let's call it research that I do, best place is probably Instagram, so instagram.com/1000holds, or there's also a website for that, 1000holds.net. So yeah, for collar and elbow, collarandelbow.ie. For the folk wrestling stuff in general, 1000holds.net. If you want, find me on Facebook, add me on Facebook. That's basically it.
You have one of the most interesting Facebook feeds between all the maps that you draw and some of the travels that you do. It's amazing. I really recommend. I think the content you put out on social media and some of the trips you were taking before the pandemic are just worth the follow. So I encourage everybody, follow this man. And good talking to you, bud.
Cool. Thank you.
Good to see you. Good to talk to you. Bye-bye. Thank you for listening, Panda Nation. We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Inverted Gear podcast. You can find us at invertedgear.com as well as your favorite podcast app. Don't forget to give us a like, and we'll see you soon.